Hello, General Biology, and welcome to the second in the screencast series of Chapter 7, Cell Structure and Function. And today we're going to talk about the difference between prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells. And you'll see that I have two little tables on here, but we're first going to start by watching a video to explain the difference.
On Earth, there are two major types of cells, prokaryotic and eukaryotic. Prokaryotic cells are the simplest and most ancient types of cells. They were the only form of life on Earth for billions of years before eventually giving rise to eukaryotic cells. If you take a look at prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells side by side, you can see a number of differences. To begin with, prokaryotic cells are a lot smaller than eukaryotic cells and have a simpler structure. But bear in mind that this simple structure is actually a good thing for prokaryotes because it allows them to reproduce very quickly and very effectively. If you were to look inside a prokaryotic cell, you would probably be surprised at how simple it is. For example, prokaryotic cells lack a nucleus. In fact, the name prokaryote actually gives you a hint about its structure. Kary means kernel or nucleus, and pro means before. So basically the word prokaryote means before nucleus. The inside of the prokaryotic cell is basically an open unit with no compartments. There are no membrane-bound organelles. However, small structures called ribosomes are scattered throughout its cytoplasm. The cell's DNA is located in a region of the cytoplasm called the nucleoid region. The nucleoid region is not the same thing as a nucleus because it's not enclosed by a membrane. Prokaryotes also have a cell wall that surrounds the plasma membrane. The composition of the cell wall depends on whether the cell is an archaean or a bacteria, but basically it consists of complex polysaccharides. Prokaryotes also often possess one or more flagella, which are used for movement. In contrast, eukaryotic cells contain a membrane-bound nucleus and other membrane-bound organelles. The name eukaryote also gives a hint about its structure. Eu means true, and remember that kary means nucleus, so in essence the word eukaryote means true nucleus. Eukaryotic cells are larger and much more complicated than prokaryotic cells. However, they do share a few things in common with prokaryotes. Let's take a look at a Venn diagram to compare prokaryotes to eukaryotes and to also see what areas they have in common. Let's start with their commonalities. Both prokaryotes and eukaryotes have DNA as their genetic material, have ribosomes, have cytoplasm, and have a plasma membrane. Now let's look at some of the ways they differ. Prokaryotic cells are the oldest type of cell. They're small and relatively simple. Eukaryotic cells evolved from prokaryotic cells later. They're larger and much more complex internally. Prokaryotes lack both a nucleus and membrane-bound organelles. Eukaryotic cells have a nucleus and also contain organelles. Prokaryotes are single-celled organisms. Eukaryotes can be either single-celled or multicellular. And finally, the DNA of a prokaryote is usually organized as a single circular chromosome, while the DNA of a eukaryote is organized as linear chromosomes.
Okay, so as you heard from that video, we're going to be looking at two classifications of cells, prokaryotes or eukaryotes. Prokaryotes are before the nucleus. These are cells that are not going to have a true nucleus. And eukaryotes are going to be cells that have a true nucleus. Ladies, I'm going to say that the videos that you watch, you're responsible for that information that's in there, so you can pause and take notes on that if you need to. So what we know about prokaryotic cells is that they don't have any internal structures that they function with. The material that they need to survive is there. It's just not separated in a membrane, so no internal membrane organelles. They do have nucleic acid. As you heard, it's typically going to be DNA, but there are some bacterial cells that will have just RNA as well. They will have ribosomes, and we're going to call ribosomes organelles, but ribosomes are actually made up of what we call subunits, and they're pieces. And these pieces do not have a membrane. So even though they fall under the category of organelles, they lack a membrane. And they are found inside of prokaryotic cells. Prokaryotic cells will have cytoplasm. Cytoplasm, as you'll see defined below, is something known as a colloidal suspension. And a colloid is something that is between a liquid and a solid. It has properties of both. Kind of like slime. If you're familiar with Nickelodeon and how slime can pour out, but yet you can compact slime and you can get it to form a ball in your hand because your hand supports that. That's what a colloid is. It has properties of being both a liquid and a solid. In the cytoplasm, this is where cellular metabolism is going to happen. And this is where all of the chemical reactions for the life processes of cellular activity occurs. It's also going to help provide structure. It's going to give that cell shape, and this is where transport of materials will happen. Storage of nutrients and compounds will occur. In eukaryotic cells, it'll hold the organelles in place. And then it's also going to surround the nucleus. But in prokaryotic cells, that cytoplasm is just going to be a suspension that will be used as storage and holding things and giving shape. Prokaryotic cells are typically bacteria, and prokaryotic cells are thought to be the first cell in terms of evolution. Eukaryotic cells, on the other hand, they're going to have these membrane-bound organelles. And as you see the definition below, organelles are specialized structures that act like organs of the cells. That means that they carry out specific activities, and you're going to have to know those activities when we start talking about them. They're the way that that cell is going to survive. Those activities are part of cellular metabolism, the chemical reactions that keep the cell alive. The nucleus is going to be one of the distinct structures of the eukaryotic cell. It's going to contain the nucleic acids that we were introduced to in Chapter 2, the RNA, the ribonucleic acid, and the DNA, the deoxyribonucleic acid. Two very important molecules that we will spend whole chapters on. We're going to see ribosomes that will be present inside of eukaryotic cells, and ribosomes are going to be the sites where protein synthesis is going to occur. They're made up of the same way that they are in prokaryotic cells. They're subunits. They're not membrane bound. We're also going to have cytoplasm, and the cytoplasm, as described below, is going to be that colloidal suspension where materials are stored and holding things into place. Eukaryotic cells are specialized. That means they have a particular job. So we've got nerve cells that are eukaryotic, skin cells that are eukaryotic, muscle cells that are eukaryotic, digestive cells that are eukaryotic. So they are specialized cells that carry out a specific function or a job in order for that organism to survive. And the types of organisms that are eukaryotic, everything else, plants, animals, fungi, protists, those are all going to be eukaryotic cells. We're going to spend more time talking about the eukaryotic cells than we do the prokaryotic cells. Now, again, I want you to be able to remember this. So this is what I think of when I think of prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells. You're familiar with vegetable soup. In vegetable soup, you can see the corn and the carrots and the potatoes and the green beans and the lima beans. I don't like lima beans, yuck. But you can see those. They're there. And that's what the organelles would be like. All the different vegetables that you could see in vegetable soup. If I took that vegetable soup and I ran it through a blender or a food processor, would I be able to see all the different vegetables? No. Okay? And that's what a prokaryotic is. The material's still there. In vegetable soup, we still have the lima beans, which now I can't see, so I can't remove them. We still have the green beans, the carrots, the potatoes, the corn, the peas, but it's all mushed together. So the material that would function like the material that's bound in the organelles of eukaryotes is still there in the prokaryotes, but it's just not distinctly membrane bound and you can't see it. So that's the difference between the two. Having the membrane bound organelles makes the eukaryotic cell bigger. It's also thought that the eukaryotic cell evolved from prokaryotic cells. They believe that different organelles like mitochondria, which contain DNA, and so does chloroplast contain DNA, that they could have been the first prokaryotic cells, and when the conditions of the earth changed, they needed to develop symbiotic relationships in order to survive together, and through that symbiosis, the eukaryotic cell developed. Okay, I'm going to end this here. We're going to start with a video in the next section.